Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Ocean Vision Summit session, Healthy Ocean, Healthy People. I remind everyone to keep your videos and microphone muted and to add your questions and comments using the chat function. We're really excited about this session. Our goal with this session is to highlight the many important links between ocean health and human health, and importantly, identify and discuss what paths for actions are needed to support healthy ocean and healthy people, and what partnerships and actions will deliver these solutions. My name is Micheli. I co-direct Center for Ocean Solutions at Stanford University with James Sleep. And I want to start by acknowledging the co-chairs of this session, and you can read more information about them in the chat. So the co-chairs are Sarah Allard, Anupa Asokan, Collin Closek, Gertrude Ecklu-Mensah, Jack Gilbert. Let me make sure that I don't forget Gretta, Pecl, and Manu, Prakash, Susanne, Sokolow, and Micheli, Tigchelaar. So today we will start with recorded presentations of 7 speakers that will take us from the science and the practice of planetary health all the way to action pathways. During the presentations, you can add your comments and questions in chat, and after the presentation, we will go in Q&A and in a discussion with all our speakers. So without further ado, I think that we can start with the first presentation by Dr. Sokolow, who will introduce us to levers for planetary health. You can start the presentation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Susanne Sokolow. Happy to be here. I'm a researcher at Stanford University and also at the University of California's Marine Science Institute. I actually started out my career trajectory as a veterinarian, but I was one veterinarian who was never super comfortable limiting myself to just the clinic setting. While I was taking care of Fluffy as a veterinarian, I was always dreaming about bigger existential questions, and I was fascinated in particular with the connections between human health, animal health, and the health of natural ecosystems. Ultimately, I ended up following that passion, and I pursued a PhD in ecology, and for my PhD, I studied diseases of reef-building corals in the Caribbean. Fast forward 20 years and here I am. I've become an executive director and co-founder of a new program for disease ecology, health, and the environment at Stanford University, where we study solutions that protect the health of people and the planet. And to do that, one of my early questions that burned in my mind was, can we simultaneously advance conservation goals and reduce human infectious disease burdens? I think in the midst of our current pandemic situation, many people can agree this question is top of mind. And I think the answer to the question is fundamentally yes, but it does require a shift from recognizing human and planetary health linked problems to enacting actionable solutions. And that means taking a step beyond basic research on the drivers of human disease and turning that knowledge into the foundation on which we can design levers for health and conservation. What do I mean by this? We need to find leverage points that fall along the causal pathway that link ecosystem integrity fundamentally to human health, and also the reverse, the causal pathway linking human health to degradation or conservation and restoration of nature and of ecosystems. So ultimately, the hope offered by the ecological lever, if it works, is that it might protect human health and benefit conservation and sustainability goals simultaneously. A group of about 30 experts and scientists from around the world has been contemplating this question with me for about 3 years. We've put together a massive review of the literature analyzing over 12,000 publications and compiling all the proposed solutions that we could find that promise these win-win outcomes for human infectious disease control and protection or restoration of natural ecosystems. So far, we've reviewed and found 46 such solutions, and many of these focus on marine and coastal communities. The solutions capitalize on these deep connections between human health and biodiversity, or ocean industry, or coastal land-sea connections. So, as just a first example, there's been quite a lot of research to support the dual benefits, for example, of to humans and to wildlife, of preventing and cleaning up protozoan pollution in the coastal environment. And I mean that shedding of parasites from land-based sources like Cryptosporidium, Giardia, Toxoplasma find their way into the coastal environment and can cause die-offs in iconic marine mammals like sea otters, as well as impacting human health. So, for an example, there's some evidence to support that controlling this protozoal pollution could lead to benefits for both people and nature. Targeting treatment of and management of fecally contaminated runoff through either gray infrastructure like treatment plants, or through restoration of coastal wetlands, which have also shown to have benefit in reducing these infectious diseases. And there's also moderate evidence about causal pathways and our ability to intervene in them in the opposite direction. So here, for example, we review a set of case studies whereby HIV/AIDS treatment programs, is often bundled with reproductive health care and women's empowerment programs, have led to much more successful coastal conservation outcomes than conservation programs alone. And this is just one example of many solutions that focus on PHE, or population health and environment connections. Now, all of these solutions I'm talking about are in review at the moment, but once the paper is published, this website containing the full menu of 46 solutions will be made available, and hopefully you can explore it and inspire more thinking and more research in this area. And this effort is part of the broader thinking about health that is the essence of this new field called planetary health, which concerns itself with both human health and the natural systems that underpin it. And pushing these boundaries is super important, because how we define health makes a big difference to how we treat it, how we develop our research, and how we approach our practice. Now, there's 4 essential cross-cutting principles of planetary health that I want you to keep in mind during this session. That is the urgency and sheer scale of the health and environmental crisis that we're facing, the interdisciplinary systems thinking approach that is really needed to solve it. I also want you to think about the environmental justice and human dimensions of these planetary health problems. And finally, the deep dedication to translating the science beyond describing problems into action. With that, I'm really happy to thank our wonderful working group on ecological levers for health. Thank you for your attention, and I invite you to lean in and enjoy the following presentations. Hopefully they'll inspire you a little bit, and you're welcome anytime to reach out and talk to us more about this promising new field of study.
Greetings from Penang, Malaysia, where WorldFish headquarters is located. My name is Tigchelaar, and my presentation is on the role of aquatic foods in food and nutrition security. I will talk about what are aquatic foods, their multiple roles and benefits, and put this in context of the present state of global food and nutrition security. Then, how can we use aquatic foods as superfoods to nourish nations? And conclude with 4 key messages. Aquatic foods are diverse and many: animals, plants, and microorganisms, and in our times, also lab foods. We must shift from the well-used terms, fish, seafood, to aquatic foods in order to make full use of the diversity and multiple benefits of all aquatic foods. Aquatic foods do not exist on their own. They are part of food systems consisting of elements, for example, the people, activities, for example, production and consumption, and importantly, the outcomes. The outcomes of aquatic food systems are multiple, contributing to the 3 dimensions of sustainable development. More than 800 million depend directly on aquatic food systems for their livelihood. Most of them are poor and vulnerable, and very many depend on aquatic foods for food and nutrition. Aquatic foods for many are the most affordable animal source food and also provide income. Many aquatic foods have lower environmental costs in production than animal source foods on land. Luckily, the narrative on aquatic foods is evolving, and they are increasingly being recognized as the source of multiple, highly bioavailable minerals and vitamins, as well as essential fatty acids. Many more aquatic foods are recognized as superfoods. Presently, seaweed is gaining ground as a new generation of sustainable aquatic superfoods. So, small amounts of aquatic foods on the plate can make huge changes. We must make use of the diversity of aquatic foods. As you can see here, as with all food groups, the contributions to nutrients are also diverse. Importantly, for example, for the poor and vulnerable, commonly found pelagic small fish species are superfoods in terms of multiple nutrient contribution. So let us put all of this in context of global food and nutrition security. At present, there is much activity to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And with the upcoming UN Food Systems Summit 2021, also SDG 2, zero hunger and eliminating all forms of malnutrition, undernutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, and overweight. We have less than 10 years to reach these goals, and presently, the situation is dire. 2 billion people do not have access to safe, nutritious, and sufficient foods, with the majority of these living in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, where aquatic foods have strong potential to contribute as superfoods. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought about an unprecedented scale of disruption to the food systems and affect many women, more women than men, and children in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia are suffering disproportionately. With this bleak outlook, we have the possibility to make use of aquatic foods as superfoods for nourishing nations. Not many countries, especially low and middle income countries, have strong recommendations for inclusion of aquatic foods in food-based dietary guidelines. We must strengthen this. We must ensure that the multiple benefits of aquatic foods are put to good use beyond the nutrients they bring, also on the plate, enhancing micronutrient bioavailability from the plant source foods on the plate, and bring other nutritious foods with them through preparations and in meals. Aquatic food products, for example, dried small fish, are particularly valuable as they are accessible, have long shelf life, are easy to transport over long distances, and can extend the period of consumption. In Cambodia, the government and UNICEF are using a wafer with small fish powder for treating malnourished children. In many countries where aquatic foods are culturally acceptable, we can make use of products, for example, dried small fish and fish powder in food and nutrition programs, such as food-based safety nets, school feeding, and mother and child health care programs, and especially now in COVID-19 responses. We must include aquatic foods in the first 1,000 days of life, in women and children to nourish nations, school performance, work performance, and intergenerational. A well-nourished woman gives birth to a healthy child, all contributing enormously to national development. Let me conclude with 4 key messages. 1. Incorporate diverse aquatic foods in food-based dietary guidelines. Conduct research on the multiple benefits of aquatic foods on the plate, paying attention to the enhancing factor. Include aquatic foods in food and nutrition programs, safety net programs, school feeding, mother and child health care programs, and improve the quality of data of aquatic foods across the entire food system. Thank you so much.
Good day. Thank you so much for this opportunity to present at the Ocean Vision Summit, particularly the session in Healthy Ocean and Healthy People. My name is Laura Fleming, and I'll be talking very briefly about an area called Ocean, or Oceans and Human Health. I personally situate this area within Rockstrom and others' planetary boundaries, where it's clear that we are going over the planetary boundaries of many aspects of the ocean. And I also like Kate Raworth, an economist's idea of situating our own human health and other aspects, such as social equity boundaries, within the planetary boundaries. I also think that ocean and human health situates well within planetary health, the idea being that our health is inextricably dependent on the health of our planet. And it also connects to the Sustainable Development Goals, which are particularly appealing to me because I think in order to deliver these goals, we must realize that our health and the health of the environment are inextricably linked. And so when I think of ocean and human health, I actually think that they are completely overlapped and intertwined. When a lot of people talk about how the ocean affects human health and well-being, they tend to focus on the risks. In particular, the obvious one is climate change with its storms, its floods, ocean acidifications, and short and long-term consequences around the world. But also we seem to have a growth in harmful algal blooms, which can affect people through toxins through the food chain, fisheries destruction globally, microbial pollution from the land and directly from sewage dumped into the ocean and coasts, and associated with that antimicrobial resistance, and of course, man-made chemicals, which have entered our food chain, air, and water, with plastics actually being only the tip of the iceberg, as the Monaco report pointed out. I've been lucky enough to spend the last decade plus with colleagues around the world, also focusing not just on the risks, but also the benefits of ocean and human health. An obvious one is seafood and aquaculture. Seafood provides protein and essential nutrients that can actually prevent certain chronic diseases to many people around the world. We've also developed amazing modeling and forecasting systems, such as hurricane warnings associated with the ocean, and marine biodiversity provides us currently with chemotherapy and other natural products and the promise of other resources such as alternatives to plastics. Increasingly, marine renewable energy is being targeted as a way, ironically, somewhat to rid ourselves or decrease our use of fossil fuels. And I personally have been involved with many colleagues around the world in the particular area of how interacting with blue spaces, particularly with sustainable, equitable access, can be good for our physical health and our mental well-being. And just a little bit of evidence in that area, one of my favorite early studies was about choosing a hotel room. Showed people these 3 different pictures, which would be the view from the same hotel room, and we asked people which they liked the best. And uniformly, even in landlocked countries like Uzbekistan, they wanted the blue view. And even then, they were willing to pay for it. And I would argue, thanks to the pandemic, people are probably willing to pay even more for that now. We also looked at census data for the UK, many millions of people looking at their self-reported health and how far they lived from the coast. And the closer they are to the coast, the more they report better self-reported health once you take into account a lot of things like income, unemployment, et cetera. The exciting thing from a public health point of view is these effects are strongest almost uniformly in poor communities, particularly in more industrialized countries. And this pattern, it continues even when people are moving to and from the coast. And finally, and again, this is just a taster of the evidence. I have colleagues at Plymouth University who collaborated with us to do an intervention trial using virtual reality. Virtual reality blue space is important for people who can't reach the ocean or other blue spaces. And they took dental patients and randomized them to standard care and 2 virtual environments, one virtual city and one beautiful blue environment, and asked them about their experience of pain directly afterwards and about a week later. And those who experienced the virtual reality blue experienced significantly less pain, and they were also much more likely to wish to go back and sign up to see the dentist, an important public health intervention. And this was even with real life situations such as tooth extractions. However, this conference is focused on solutions, and I also think it is on all of us to figure out how do we help others to care about what's happening to our ocean. And so I'll give you a couple of suggestions and possible solutions or ways that people and communities around the world are trying to address this. And one of them is in Spain, in a small town called Rosas in Catalonia, which shares a peninsula in the Mediterranean with the Cap de Creus marine protected area. And Dr. Josep Lloret, with his colleagues at the University of Girona, this town of Rosas and the marine protected area, as well as local fishery cooperative and many others, are actively using ocean and human health as an approach to how they can live sustainably with tourism and fisheries as their major economy. Another area I'll point out is the Blue Climate Initiative, which is focused on carbon and climate change and the ocean. And they have recently given out awards to small communities around the world who are in action in this area. But they also have a vision of linking up climate communities around, blue communities around the world to share knowledge, expertise, and resources. And I'll just point to the many activities out there of our youth, and this truly does give me hope. One last area that I'm particularly interested in, and it's fairly recent, started by 2 colleagues of mine who are physicians in the NHS, the National Health Service of the UK. And they've pointed out that the National Health Service, both in the UK and really in all the countries around the world, is a huge consumer and also a huge carbon impact. So much of the supplies and even the waste that leaves it that comes to the NHS in the UK, much of the carbon impact is through shipping, and shipping has other impacts on the ocean environment, but in particular, we've been focusing on carbon. And yet at the same time, there's a growing movement in the UK and elsewhere towards the use of social prescribing, which is sustainably interacting with blue environments, particularly, to both treat and prevent chronic diseases such as mental health and obesity. And we are calling this area NHS Ocean, and it's starting in the UK, but it is something that can literally go around the world. And we urge you to join us in this. And then I'll just finally point out that we are currently in a UN Ocean Decade, and there is the opportunity to create ocean actions, and it would be wonderful to have an ocean action, for example, around oceans and human health, where we work with people who live in and around marine protected areas around the world to learn how to more sustainably interact with the oceans going forward. So this is a word cloud from an IOC webinar on oceans and human health. And we asked people at the end of the webinar, what does ocean and human health mean to you? And what gives me hope is that life is at the center of this, all of our lives. I want to thank my many colleagues in this area, and I'm very happy to be able to speak to anyone who wishes to follow up, and thank you for listening.
Hello, I'm Drew Harvell from Cornell University. Thank you for including me in the Healthy Oceans, Healthy People Summit. This morning, I'm going to talk about nature services for a healthier ocean. And I'd like to introduce my 2 co-authors, Phoebe Dawkins and Jolie Lamb from University of California, Irvine. The topics that I'm going to talk about today, I'll start with infectious epidemics in the ocean and how they're increasing with warming. This is the bad news part of my talk. Then I'll move on to talk about the superpowers of seagrasses and bivalve for cleansing and hygiene in the ocean. And this is the good news part of my talk. and then developed the notion that we can work on nature services for healthier oceans as a solution. So these are just a few snapshots of some of the taxa that we and others have studied that have temperature-sensitive infectious diseases. These are the sorts of diseases that can outbreak in warming conditions. So as climate warms, there's the potential for more outbreaks of disease for sea life. I want to highlight one of the outbreaks, one of the epidemics. It's actually a pandemic that occurred that we've worked on. It's called sea star wasting disease. And I'm highlighting it because it started suddenly, somewhat like COVID, and rather unexpectedly, and was responsible for billions of stars dying over the course of several years. So this is cataloged as the largest marine wildlife pandemic. It started in 2013, and it continues on our West Coast shores. At least 20 sea star species are affected. So this is a broad host range, including an ecologically important keystone species shown here, the sunflower star, which this year we have just listed as endangered with the International Union of Conservation of Nature. And this is described in a paper that we published in 2019, talking about the continental scale collapse of this once common predator. And then here's just some of the background citizen science data, just kind of ensuring that you can see that this species was very common from 2007, drastically declined to essentially zero in California, where it remains at essentially zero to this day. It's also catastrophically low in the waters of Oregon and Washington, all the way up to Alaska. The decline of this pivotal predator is associated with explosions in its prey, the sea urchin, which is causing demise and endangerment of kelp beds. And so this has had a very large ecological impact. Now I want to turn to a foundation ecosystem and look at the base of the food chain. Eelgrass meadows are a vital habitat with important services, and I'm guessing that most people do know how important the nursery and habitat services are for eelgrass meadows, and of course also for blue carbon storage. But what you may know less about, because there actually has not been very much work on it, is the value of the filtration services. And there's potential for this ecosystem to reduce disease risk for humans and corals. However, it itself is affected by epidemics of a disease caused by an infectious protozoan that causes these kinds of lesions. I want to summarize for you our first season's work from 2019 on an NSF grant designed to study the role of this host pathogen system on a latitudinal scale. So we have, with partners, monitoring from San Diego all the way to Alaska. At each of these nodes, there are 5 subsites, and at each subsite, there are 8 transects. So thousands of eelgrass blades are surveyed in this study. And what you can see here is there's pretty high levels. So this is Washington State, Alaska, British Columbia, Bodega Bay in California, Oregon, and San Diego. You can see at our site, 75% of the blades in the 2019 survey were affected by this disease. And I really want to point out that one of the goals of this study is over time to investigate the linkages between the levels of this disease and climate change or warming. And in this case, what I'm plotting is the disease prevalence against the temperature anomaly. So of course the northern sites are colder than the southern sites. However, in 2019, all of our northern sites, the Washington, Alaska, BC, showed a temperature anomaly. So the waters, although colder, were anomalously warm. And this was associated with a higher level of disease prevalence. So this is the kind of investigation that we're continuing to link outbreaks of this disease with warming. Over time, I've done a lot of this work and decided to write a book called Ocean Outbreak, Confronting the Rising Tide of Marine Disease. And the 2 main points are, one, that infectious disease outbreaks of marine biota are fueled by warming, as I've said, and this threatens marine biodiversity and our food from the sea. However, natural marine ecosystems have special powers to reduce pathogen load, and I want to talk about that now. This is the first study we published on this topic, led by then postdoc Jolie Lam in my lab, showing that pathogenic bacteria can be reduced by 50% in Indonesian seagrass beds. And let's just start looking at these pink boxes. These are Petri dishes, and what we're culturing here are Enterococcus indicator bacteria. You can see there's lots of little pink dots in the seagrass absent sites. The paired seagrass present sites have very low levels. And then you can see that plotted here with this very steep decline from shore into the seagrass meadows, showing a 50% decline. I'm not showing all the sequence bacteria, but that work was also done. A key thing about this study is that we were able to link coral disease also being lower in seagrass meadows. And so this is the point, that both human health and environmental health or coral health can be linked by providing favorable marine habitats. We thought it was important to also do this work in the continental US. And so this is a paper that's now in development, it's not published yet, showing that human pathogens are also lower in Seattle eelgrass meadows. This is the seagrass that we have in our temperate seas. This is a place where there also are sewer overflow violations. And in fact, we detected 33 human pathogens from the mussels used as bioindicators in our study. So we put out mussels inside and outside seagrass meadows throughout Seattle's urban waters and Puget Sound, and showed that after several months, the levels of pathogens were lower where the mussels were put with seagrass than where the seagrass was absent. So what I'm calling for is a more full economic and ecosystem value accounting of benefits of habitats like seagrasses and mangroves. So currently, the Nature Conservancy's Resilience Program does indeed improve valuations of these habitats, taking account of the very important climate mitigation services and essential fisheries habitat of eelgrass meadows. But what they don't do yet is account for human health benefits and biodiversity health. And so, to summarize, nature services can break the pandemic risk. I've talked about infectious pandemics causing mass mortality. I've talked about how climate change is accelerating disease risk in the oceans. This is also the case on land. And I've talked about nature having spectacular superpowers for pathogen reduction. And I want to focus a little more on this point because this is a frontier. This is an area with a lot of knowledge gaps. We know that natural microbiomes kill bacteria. We know that drugs from the sea kill bacteria. We know that there can be reduced disease in coral marine protected areas. We know that there can be reduced disease in seagrass meadows. We have evidence for pathogen cleansing or removal of bacteria in seagrass meadows. And we also know that organisms like bivalves can filter out pathogens. And so collectively, these little pink boxes add up to a new science frontier. And I'm suggesting more study of mechanisms of disease regulation in nature so that we understand better nature's superpowers. And this can lead to a breaking of this bad chain. So thank you very much to our future leaders and all of my collaborators.
Good afternoon. I'm Amy Wright from the Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute at Florida Atlantic University in Fort Pierce, Florida. I'm going to talk to you today about the oceans as sources of new medicines. Wherever you find biological diversity, you will find chemical diversity. Many plants, animals, and microbes have the ability to produce small organic molecules that are often called natural products or specialized metabolites. The compounds may be produced by one organism or through the interaction between associated organisms. Because it takes energy to make these compounds, we assume that they all provide some advantage to the producing organisms. For example, they may block predation or allow the organism to colonize more space or direct larval settlement or protect it from bacterial or viral infection. Because we share biochemistry with these organisms, we can take advantage of these chemicals to treat human diseases. About 50% of small molecule drugs can be traced back to natural products. The drug can be the natural product itself, and morphine, shown here, is an example of a natural product used extensively as a painkiller. They can also be derivatives of the natural product or be inspired by a compound found in nature and be structurally modified to have more drug-like properties. Aspirin is an example of a compound that is a derivative of a natural product that's found in the bark of willows and birch trees. In this case, a small change, the addition of an acetate group, makes the compound more stable and useful as a medicine. There are a growing number of marine natural products approved for clinical use. Currently, there are about 15, but many more are in clinical trials, including one to treat COVID-19, something we all need. The examples shown here are all used in the treatment of cancer. Yondelis comes from the tunicate Actinicidea turbinata and has been approved for use against soft tissue sarcoma and ovarian cancer. Lurbinectedin, shown right next to it, is a derivative of Yondelis and differs only in the bottom part of the molecule. This modification gave it improved activity and lower toxicity. It was approved just last November for the treatment of small cell lung cancer and is one of only 2 compounds currently approved for this form of cancer. And interestingly, both of those are natural products. Halaven, shown here, is approved for metastatic breast cancer and is based on the structure of a larger molecule called halocondrin B. It was found that this simplified molecule gave all the same cancer-fighting properties as the parent halocondrin B. The structure at the bottom is an antibody-drug conjugate, and there are a number of these that have been approved and quite a few more in clinical trials. It links a potent toxin, this is the toxin part, to a monoclonal antibody that can deliver the toxin very selectively to the cancer cell, providing a cancer-selective agent. In this case, the toxin is called monomethyl auristatin E and is based upon the marine natural product dolastatin 10. Dolastatin 10 originally was found from a sea hare called Lobelle, but we now know it's actually made by a cyanobacteria. Much of our work at Harbor Branch has focused on organisms collected from deep water habitats using submersibles. The use of the submersibles has allowed us to collect a wide variety of unusual organisms that have unusual chemistry and great potential for finding new medicines. Much of the ocean has not been explored in deep water, and so there's a lot of opportunity still there. So new knowledge and technologies enable us to make new discoveries. So virtually every day, I receive a newsletter that describes a new target for intervention in diseases such as cancer, inflammation, Alzheimer's disease, you name it. There's an explosion of knowledge about what causes these diseases and provides us with new ways to intervene to treat the diseases. There's also new equipment and technology that allows us to take advantage of some of this knowledge. For example, one of the things very useful in our laboratories is this high content imager. It's an amazing microscope that can very rapidly, in just seconds, take images of cells that would have taken hours just a few years ago. It also allows us to rapidly quantitate the changes in the cells, making it very useful in drug discovery. The center image shows you cells that have been fluorescently tagged to detect a protein called survivin. The presence of survivin in cancer cells correlates with a negative prognosis for patients. You see it as kind of pink or sometimes a little bit orange, depending upon your computer in the image, and that's the protein survivin in these cancer cells. In the right-hand image, you see cancer cells treated with one of our marine natural products. And hopefully you can see that there's a significant reduction in the amount of the pink signal, which correlates to a reduction in the protein survivin. And this compound may represent a new way to treat cancer. The high content imager also allows us to develop other types of assays that we couldn't do in the past. So my colleague, Dr. Esther Guzman, who heads our cancer drug discovery program at Harbor Branch, has begun to test for compounds using a model of tumor spheroids. For over 30 years, we've looked for cancer drugs by growing the cancer cells as monolayers adhere to the bottom of the assay plate. So you can kind of see here's the well of the assay plate, and there's the cells that are stuck to the bottom. And this is not very representative of how actual tumors grow. But now, using new technologies, we can grow the cancer cells as 3D cultures. So they grow as what we call spheroids, and this is much more similar to how the cells grow in an actual tumor. Although we could grow spheroids for many years before the high content imager was available, it was virtually impossible to screen any number of compounds. It would take too many hours to test just one compound. So here, this is working very rapidly. Once again, in just seconds, you can image a well and look at the spheroids. So my colleague is using these high content imaging to find better cancer drugs. So these are images of the tumor spheroids using triple negative breast cancer cells grown as the spheroids. The left-hand image shows the spheroid treated with solvent control. The blue is a stain for the nucleus of the cell, and all of the little tiny blue dots that you're seeing are individual cells within the spheroid. The green is a marker for apoptosis or programmed cell death. Ideally, we would like to kill the cancer cells through apoptosis. As you can see in the control, there's a small amount of green, which is expected because we have gradients of nutrients and we have less oxygen in the center of the spheroid. So this is what we expect to see. It's what happens in real tumors. The center image shows the spheroid treated with a compound that is known to induce apoptosis or programmed cell death in cancer cells. And you can see a large amount of green in this treatment. The right-hand image is the spheroid treated with the marine natural product called furospinolosin-1, which also induces high level of apoptosis in the cancer cells and is about 7 times more potent than the control compound. And I want to draw to your attention that all of this is happening within just 24 hours of treatment. Interestingly, this compound is not active in the traditional 2D model for cancer drug discovery, and we believe it may kill cancer cells through pathways that are more specific to tumors. Dr. Guzman lab is continuing to study this compound and how it works. We hope one day that maybe we'll be able to move this into the clinic. It's looking kind of promising so far. So if we couple the incredible biodiversity of the oceans with new knowledge of what drives disease and new technologies that allow us to test for compounds that can intervene in these targets within the diseases, it's my opinion that we can revolutionize treatment and eliminate many of the diseases that continue to plague humankind. Conserving the biodiversity of the oceans is essential to finding these ocean-based cures. So thank you for listening to my talk, and some acknowledgement to the Cooperative Institute for helping with funding, and the State of Florida Bankhead Collin and our Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute Foundation for funding the work on the spheroids. We thank you for your attention.
International Surf Therapy Organization. Who are we? Well, we're a collective of the world's leading surf therapy practitioners and clinicians, researchers and influencers working together to share and develop best practices, collaborate and facilitate the research, and advocate for surf therapy to be used globally to improve mental health and uniquely improve our oceans along the way. Our mission is to enable more inclusive access to safe surf therapy, and we envision a world where surf therapy is universally accessible through prescription. As you can see, we like to have a bit of fun along the way. Hi, my name is Chris Permasio. I'm the CEO, but sharing a headshot of myself seemed misleading without showing you where I spend about 350 days out of the year. I started surfing when I was 41 years old. As of this year, I've been surfing for 10 years, so note to self, it's never too late to start surfing. For the entirety of my surfing journey, I witnessed my hero, that is my father, battle cancer outliving his terminal diagnosis by 4 years, and since 2016 have had to navigate life on Earth without him. I still find myself running to the ocean to rinse my saltwater tears with the ocean's salt water. Surfing, and more specifically surf therapy, gave me purpose and continues to mend my broken heart. What is surf therapy? It is so much more than photos can express. Last year, we facilitated the first ever academic journal dedicated to surf therapy research around the globe and collaborated on this now published definition. It's a method of intervention combining surfing and activities to promote psychological, physical, and psychosocial well-being. But what is it really? At our last in-person symposium in 2019, we brought over 250 people together from 5 continents. We ended the week-long event with a beach cleanup and delivered surf therapy to a mixed population of veterans, vulnerable youth, children with physical disadvantages, and first responders. And since I couldn't bring you to the beach, this was the next best thing. Some more examples of that fun I mentioned earlier. Hopefully next time we can host a surf therapy event and bring all of you with us down to the beach. The world pandemic and civil unrest have highlighted, and certainly here in the US, exacerbated both the existing and new barriers to access mental health services. We believe global recognition, training, and prescription surf therapy would provide countless individuals with an alternative methodology to support their mental and physical well-being. Some of the psychological benefits we're seeing: improved self-efficacy, emotional regulation with those on the autism spectrum or those with Down syndrome, and we're finding re-engagement with our veterans and first responders at home and in the workplace. Some of the physical improvements include cardiovascular fitness, of course, but you just sleep better after a day in the ocean and on your surfboard. And all those smiles are bonuses. We've traded the couch in for a surfboard. Whether they sought out traditional talk therapy or struggle with depression and anxiety and found themselves glued to a sofa, isolated and binge watching TV, these same individuals are getting off the couch, grabbing a surfboard, and going surfing. Some licensed clinicians who run sessions equate 1 day of surf therapy to as much as 6 weeks of traditional treatment. There's a rise in holistic approaches to aid our mental health, of course, and there's a wealth of research that tells us being physically active in nature can aid to our mental wellness. But the evidence for the benefits of surf therapy are still in its infancy. Through our global efforts, surf therapy data has increased and research is taking place with more rigor. Our collaborative data shows that mental health, especially psychosocial well-being, can be improved with investments in blue spaces. So get to water. The brilliant Wallace J. Nichols, author of Blue Mind, tells us being near, in, on, and underwater makes us happier and healthier, more connected to nature, more connected to ourselves, and more connected to others. Most of the Earth's surface is covered by water. Most of our body is composed of water. But these two facts are linkages between water, health, and ecosystems. So no doubt there is a deep connection between a healthy environment and healthy humans. 970 million people worldwide have a mental health disorder. Now, this is data from 2018, so I think it's safe to say this number has increased exponentially. Is anybody really surprised that we are experiencing a global climate crisis alongside a worldwide mental health crisis? We are not separate from nature, and a significant missing link in the discussions about our mental health crisis is our relationship with nature. What about the health of nature? I cannot tell you how often I've picked up plastic bags in the lineup and paddled out 100 yards to grab yet another string of balloons and stuffed all of that into my wetsuit. I hadn't noticed the amount of trash on the beach or in the ocean until I became a surfer. I can't remember one day of surfing that I haven't picked up somebody else's garbage. And I've seen numbers as high as 1.58 billion masks were set to enter the marine environment in 2020. So how does surf therapy play an intrinsic role in protecting our waterways? Well, one could argue we're the ones bringing thousands of people to the beach each year. But here's what we're finding. Participants who experience joy, belonging, inclusion, acceptance, and very often life-changing benefits from a day of surf therapy tend to have an innate response to protect our oceans. This includes ancillary beneficiaries like our volunteers and sponsors, parents, siblings, and spouses. Because like myself, many of our participants only became stewards for the ocean after exposure. Surf therapy programs are popping up worldwide and are delivered along the shores of our oceans, rivers, seas, and lakes. We are creating the means and access to those who wouldn't otherwise have it, therefore generating new stewards of waterways everywhere. Okay, this looks like a shameless plug, but surfing is my prescription. It improves my own mental health and it maintains my physical well-being. After 10 years, it is still a place of refuge for me. And as profoundly personal as that journey has been, alongside my admitted addiction to surfing, it has still never taken on as much meaning to me as it does when I share it with others. Wallace J. Nichols goes on to say, surf therapy is going to save, improve, and heal lives because waves are medicine for those who need them most. It gives us additional justification for the protection and restoration of waterways and oceans, adding powerful new tools to the conversation and environmental communication toolbox. The health benefits of surfing only work with healthy oceans. Surf therapy exposes and therefore educates more people about the urgency required to protect all waterways. We're creating healthier humans, and we can't do that without healthy oceans. We protect what we know, and we protect what we love. Thank you.
I would like you to think about the future for a moment, to picture it in your mind's eye. You might have pictured this, or even this. But regardless what your vision of the future looks like, chances are you have a lot of uncertainty about the future and how it will play out. And that uncertainty can make us feel a bit nervous about what the future will bring. It can make you feel powerless to direct the future, and with all the challenges facing society, may make you feel pretty overwhelmed. If we are to create a future that supports healthy people and healthy oceans, it is critical that we get past those feelings of powerlessness and of being overwhelmed. We need to take targeted actions to create a more desirable future. So how can we do that? The process of developing scenarios directly exploring future uncertainty can help us create a vision or a narrative of the future that acts as a mobilizing force. What do I mean by that? Well, scenarios focus on what the future could look like, and these scenarios can then be used to explore how we might achieve a desirable future, providing a way to direct targeted action at individual, community, national and international level to achieve the future we want. A key component of this scenario development approach is the production of a shared vision of the future. I'm fairly certain at the beginning when I asked you all to picture the future, you each pictured something slightly different. Your individual picture was shaped by your worldview, your knowledge, your culture, background, and so on. Creating shared visions of the future leverages the powers of individuals and communities' experiences to develop a future that reduces inequalities and maximises opportunities for different parts of society. So how is all this discussion of the future relevant to today's session? It's relevant because we can use all the research, action, success stories and practical application we have heard about today to inform visions of the future that support ocean and human health. A future that we can then go out and actually achieve. This is the inspiration for Future Seas, a project coordinated by the Centre for Marine Socioecology, involving over 100 researchers, which has explored potential futures for the world's oceans in relation to 12 grand challenges. These future scenarios look at what we could achieve over the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. So what the world could look like by 2030. For each of these grand challenges, we explored a business-as-usual future, informed by current trends, looking at the future we're currently heading towards. We've also explored a technically possible, more sustainable future that describes what the future could look like if we used all the knowledge and technology we currently have at our fingertips, or is emerging. So all the research you've heard about so far in the talks today. The difference between these two futures is reliant on human choices, behaviour, values, policy, and so on. And I really want to emphasise that these futures we developed are not supposed to be prediction of the future. Rather, they are plausible trajectories for society into the future and are informed by available evidence. But imagining a future we all want isn't enough. We need to work out how we can actually achieve that future. So a second step in the Future Seas project has been working out what actions we need to take to achieve the future we want. How can we create a roadmap to a desirable future? As I mentioned, we explored the future in relation to 12 grand challenges facing the ocean. And one of these was addressing feedbacks between ocean health and human health. You might remember from Laurie's talk that she discussed risks and opportunities in relation to the links between human health and the ocean. We explored how we can minimise these risks or undesirable interactions between ocean and human health, and how we can maximise opportunities or desirable interactions. To explore uncertainty how the future may play out, we explored 5 drivers of change. These are factors that we as a society have the potential to influence and will have a high impact on how feedbacks between ocean and human health play out in the future. You'll see that these drivers echo much of the work that you've heard about this morning so far. How we make decisions and change people's behaviour, who has power and agency to affect change, human development and industry, our food system, and that's both on land and in the sea, and our lifestyle and connection to the oceans. Based on these drivers, we developed 2 scenarios. The business-as-usual scenario we called command and out of control, and the more sustainable scenario, which we called living and connecting. I'm not going to go through all the features of these scenarios right now, but to give you a flavour, I'm going to describe a few examples of their contrasting aspects. First of all, if we focus on behaviour change initiatives. In our business-as-usual world, these tend to focus on changing the behaviour of the individual, whereas in our more sustainable world, they focus on change at a community level. So why is this? Outcomes of individual level campaigns don't reliably drive long-term behaviour change at a population level. This is because it tends to emphasise individualist rather than communal ideals, and it may stigmatise individuals who are unable to change their behaviour, leading to increased marginalisation. Whereas community approaches will help develop community cohesion and build social capital, which are really critical for supporting the resilience of communities to cope with change in the oceans and in respect to their own health. Next, in our business-as-usual future, connection to the oceans is weak, and there are barriers to increasing this connection. Whereas in our more sustainable future, connection to the ocean is actually enabled. For example, you have heard from Chris about surf therapy. Well, another example is that of improving the quality of life of breast cancer survivors. Rather than having individual, isolated recovery programs, fly fishing camps are now being used to build a sense of community, provide gentle exercise that minimises the strengthening exercises physicians give to those recovering from surgery, and creates a sense of community. The third example is that in the business-as-usual scenario, the economic system is still very much focused on growth and a linear economy with considerable waste. In contrast, a more sustainable 2030 the policies and actions are more focused on building a balanced, circular economy. So what might this look like? Steel is essential for a range of industries, including shipbuilding. Over 1.5 billion tonnes of steel are produced each year, and this process requires approximately 800 million tonnes of coal each year. This has implications for climate change with knock-on effects for human health. In contrast, in Sustainable 2030, incentives that support environmental engineering solutions are starting to predominate. For example, green steel, which uses old tyres instead of coking coal in the steel-making process. So in this example, we're focused on reducing undesirable impacts between society and the oceans, and this in turn has the potential to reduce negative impacts of the ocean on human health. So I have described what a more desirable future might look like for delivering healthy oceans and healthy people. But how can we actually achieve that future? We're going to need significant and transformational action to meet this goal. So we also explored a potential roadmap to that future, identifying over 80 actions that would help us achieve a future where we're maximising ocean health and human health and the interactions between them. I won't go through all the actions, but they can be split into 4 key strategies that could be implemented over the next decade. The first is science and health communication. These programmes could be implemented on quite a short-term timescale. These programmes could range from formal training initiatives focused on improving ocean literacy among different stakeholder groups, through to targeted public health programmes. And there are a range of different ways they could be achieved. But regardless of the approach used, we really need to incorporate a clear understanding of the values, beliefs and worldviews held in different sectors of society so as to develop more effective communication campaigns. The second is knowledge exchange. So what do I mean by that? It focuses on the two-way exchange of knowledge among different stakeholders. And when done successfully, knowledge exchange is linked to both social learning and development of capacity from individual to organisational levels. And these are really needed to achieve the type of transformational change necessary to move towards the more sustainable future I've described. I also want to emphasise that these knowledge exchange initiatives can occur in a really diverse array of settings, not just between scientists and the public, but rather among different segments of the public. In the second half of the UN Decade of Ocean Science, we propose a greater focus on 2 strategies that we call incentives and rules and regulations. So these are strategies that directly guide individual, community and business behaviours that impact on both ocean and human health. For example, through the modification of industry practices. But what we suggest is that in order to implement the incentives and regulation-based strategies, it is essential that we first have successful implementation of the first 2 strategies, so communication and knowledge exchange, as these are necessary to help develop this sort of intrinsic motivation we needed to engage with both incentives and regulations. So what do I mean by these incentives and regulation-based strategies? Incentives can be provided by the government, such as tax incentives to provide food to the domestic rather than the export market. Whereas regulations can affect the behaviour of resource users very directly through economic, social and fiscal policy and through a variety of other rules. For instance, stronger regulation around recycling, reuse and reduction of waste as an important example of how we could aim towards this living and connecting future. Today I have given you a whistle-stop tour through one possible set of futures for feedback between ocean health and human health, and a roadmap of how we might achieve the more sustainable of those futures. But where does that leave us? The next time you think about the future and how it will play out, I challenge you to view the future with hope, and to work with others to develop a shared vision of the ocean we need for the future we want. Thank you very much.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I want to thank all of the speakers for this really wonderful and inspiring set of presentations. And we're going to start our discussion. So we'll bring all of the speakers live on Zoom and with their videos on. And then for the audience, please add your questions into the chat and we will address your questions as you pose them. And while you collect your thoughts and add your questions, I want to start with some general questions for our speakers. The science is really strong in shining the light, in highlighting the superpowers of oceans and ocean biodiversity in nourishing and healing bodies and minds. How do we fully harness this potential? What actions are needed at local, national, or global scales? What are the priorities? What can be done from your perspectives? And I want to start addressing this question of what is needed with Shakuntala, and then we will go to other. Sorry, Shakuntala, to put you on the spot.
That's okay. Okay.
So what is needed? What can we do to really realize this incredible potential the oceans have to really benefit people across diverse regions and sectors of humanity?
Thank you, Phil. But first of all, I think that the recognition of the benefits, this is new. It's even though it's innate and we all think we know it, the expression of the benefits, it's new, and really thinking about how we can harness it is new. And I do think that we have to move away from being in our little sectors, like me just talking about food. When I hear about the benefits in terms of, I should stop that noise, sorry. When we hear about the benefits in terms, for example, of medicine, we hear of the benefits in terms of mental therapy. We have to bring all those things together, not just be in our own silos, like, as I said, me, just food. I mean, food is just one element of nourishing people and nourishing the planet.
Thank you. Great point, Shakuntala. And Chris, because it really strikes me that in this presentation, we spanned food and nutrition and mental health and well-being and actually healing the body, blue medicines for healing the body. How do we start connecting these dots? Are there actions that could bring these different dimensions of ocean health and people health together?
Gosh, I don't want to sound repetitive, because my answer, I appreciate Manu, who said that some of the solutions are simple, but it's exposure. And without exposure, there's not education. So, again, I hate to repeat myself, but we do protect what we love and what we know. And without ever experiencing all that the ocean has to offer, and certainly without any fundamental understanding of how not only is it, of course, the life source for every living creature, but how damaging the pollution has been on the ocean, you just aren't going to grasp the urgency to protect it. I appreciate Flora's little cartoon, because people don't care, even if they can't explain why they don't care. I really, Flora, I got a kick out of that cartoon. I mean, it's no offense, because I know every person that's here today, they're obviously showing up. So I'm not really speaking to you. I'm a little bit embarrassed, but I didn't know as much, of course, as I know about the ocean until I spent the last 10 years immersed in it. So I think you have to have access and exposure.
Because if I should add to that, yes, you were able to do that and reach where you are in 10 years. But I do think if we look at at populations and we look at nations, we should try to start this exposure at an early age. I do think that's key, and I can see that in the way I can see. I live in Denmark for parts of my life, and I can see the way that knowledge and life habits at a very early age, what that means for people as they take it along their whole life cycle.
Yeah, what's so great, surf therapy programs prioritize vulnerable youth, and like 57% of our programs around the world are targeted for youth. And I have to tell you very quickly, I took out these 4 girls from Las Vegas, and Las Vegas is a 3.5, 4-hour ride to the ocean, but they had never been to the ocean. So after we spent 2.5 hours in the water, we did a beach cleanup, and they asked me, because they picked up so many balloons, and they said, do our balloons that we let go in Las Vegas, like at home, reach the ocean? And of course, I explained 70% of Earth is covered by waterways. And I'm not kidding. After one day of surfing, they looked at each other and they said, okay, we can never release our birthday balloons again. And that's the kind of impact that we see all the time. So I think that's what's so great, is creating the means and access, you're right, to the young people. We do create stewards for the ocean.
If I could, sorry, I'm taking up too much, but if I could give this example, which I think is really important for my field. So again, going back to Denmark. So a child as young as 3 years would, when they go to the nursery, to the kindergarten, they put their, at lunchtime, for snacks, they select their own foods. And what they know is that I have to have a rainbow plate. Mm-hmm. So they don't know the foods or what the foods, they don't have to learn at 3 years old what I talk about, micronutrients, but they know that my plate must look like a rainbow, which means so much. And the same thing as you said about the knowledge about the balloons at an early age.
Now, this is a great then segue into a question by Stanley in our chat, who asked, how do we get people to care? So early exposure, direct contact and connection with nature. And then when we are also thinking about decision makers and the public, how do we communicate the importance of ocean health for people and for its own intrinsic value, of course? And please feel free to jump in, but I wonder if Amy can start addressing this question, because your science, Amy, is complex. And there's lots of different technical and medical aspects to it. So how do you communicate the importance of blue medicine, of ocean as medicine?
Well, so, when I go out and talk to people, and we can tell them, for example, that there's a natural product right now in clinical trials for coronavirus, and it's doing really well, and we expect it to get approved very soon, and it comes from the ocean. But I think also, I live in Florida, we have lots of elderly people, and we have compounds that are coming along that look like they're going to work for maybe Alzheimer's disease. So you can tell people that maybe this kind of treatment is out there. And if the oceans are destroyed, but I live in Florida where I think a lot of people care about the ocean, so I might be spoiled. It's just like I grew up where we went body surfing all the time. And so I could relate to hearing about surfing. But I think for me, it's really, we try to tell people the message of, what all of this is providing to us. We have a lot of, this is kind of a little bit different, but we heard about seagrasses, and that's a real crisis for us in Florida right now. We have polluted so much that we have destroyed our seagrasses, and now we're having huge manatee die-offs, and people are starting to see this, cascade that happens. And so people are interested and involved. And so we have a Center for Coastal and Human Health where we're trying to deal with some of these pollutants and changes, and just communicate to people. So I bet Laura has some comments. There we go.
Wonderful talks, by the way. I just wanted to thank all my colleagues. I've learned a lot. I guess one thing I've always found very strange when I work with the ocean community as a physician epidemiologist is this bizarre, and I know there's lots of reasons for it, sort of end between the ocean and the land. And I think one thing is appealing to a particular audience. So clearly the land has a huge impact on the health of the ocean, right? I mean, just rivers, for example, I mean, the whole plastics discussion is putting that on the map. So I think if you're dealing with people who are not necessarily near the ocean or can't be exposed, as we've just been talking about, there are other blue environments that they can be exposed to and that they care about deeply. So there's things like rivers, ponds, lakes, even fountains. So I think one thing is trying to appeal to a particular audience, and what you're trying to do is make a connection between the health of what the thing they love in the environment and their own health. And I think it's particularly challenging in urban areas. But again, I think there's increasing evidence, particularly with climate and other environmental change, that in our urban environments, if we can increase the amounts of green and blue space, that it actually will help mitigate not only climate change effects, but also be good for people's mental and physical health. But I don't pretend that I have the entire answer. And I guess the last thing I would say is the Blue Climate Initiative's idea of linking up blue communities around the world of all sizes, I find very inspiring. If we could really provide resources so that could happen, so that they can share resources, training, information, et cetera, I think that's a way that could really go forward, particularly under the UN decade.
Ligeia adds in chat, I loved all your works. Thanks for sharing the data, projections to our future, and also your hopeful view about it. To anyone, so this is a question to any of the panelists who want to address it, is there any educational work with your communities? This is so important to collaborate between academia and community. Greetings from Chile. And so now to this point about communities, what is really important to do in communities? I think Shakuntala was talking about early years and youth and how they learn about what is healthy on their plate and what are other ideas and actions for bringing academics and communities together.
I would say that a really important thing is including communities and the public in research right from the start of a research project. You know, we've talked a lot about what are the actions and how do we get people to care. And I think it's really important to understand first what people care about and then build from that and use people's knowledge outside research and outside academia to help develop research projects that are relevant and are useful and address the needs that people have themselves. It's not just what we as academics believe people need or need to know. It's also understanding what people's values are and what they hold dear and how we can help support that.
Really great. And now, related to these questions about communities, there's opportunities now with the decade, with the Sustainable Development Goal, global commitments to supporting ocean health, equity, human health. How do we bring this global commitment to local benefits, to benefits local communities? What are some important links that we need to consider to realize these benefits for people everywhere? And I don't know if who wants to address it, but
okay, I'll go. So I didn't say anything yet.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah. I guess the world I work in ecology, we're very conscious that every system is sort of a snowflake into itself. It's unique. Every ecosystem, including people, including the communities that live in them, the place where people live. And so it kind of ties all the questions together, but essentially the idea behind the Ecological Levers project that I ran is finding these actionable solutions, which means understanding the systems in context of those places, in context of those communities, and understanding what the leverage points in each of those is, and abandoning this idea of a panacea approach, right? Just really understanding
these systems in the same way that we would understand all the individual drugs that are being prospected. To harness that power of nature, that superpower of nature to offer health to us and the reverse. We're going to have to put that level of effort and energy into each local place and community connection.
And Jolie, your work is so amazing in showing how looking at nature and human disease simultaneously, it's really powerful, connecting this. How do we in your field and broadly, how do we demonstrate the benefit of taking this One Health approach versus concentrating on ecosystem services and public health separately? How do we make a case for the added value of this approach?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So some of the impetus for the work that we do came about as I'm an ecologist. I was working on marine diseases, and we would go out to study marine diseases in Indonesia, and we all were severely affected by dysentery and other different impacts just studying marine diseases. And it kind of made us open our eyes a little bit to the fact that our health is linked to the marine environment. And so that's when we started thinking a little bit about, are there ecosystems and filtration processes that can be harnessed to mitigate pathogens in the water? I think we're just starting to learn that now. Seagrasses, like we were saying, they're not very charismatic. People rip them out, they touch their ankles, they're creepy. So I think, just kind of building communication around our ecosystems and like how we could benefit from them in terms of health and how they provide habitat for other organisms is really powerful.
Laura, you have a comment in the chat. Do you want to elaborate on your suggestions for MPAs as a living laboratory?
I'm not really an expert in this. I'm involved in a project called Blue Communities, funded by Global Challenge Research Funds in the UK, with 4 Southeast Asian partners. And what we're doing is working with communities that live in and around UNESCO biospheres and marine protected areas. And, these are kind of ground zero places. There's a lot of, at least the ones we're looking at, there's a lot of pressure from tourism, fisheries, climate change, et cetera. And they have diverse populations. Some of them have indigenous populations. Some of them have populations where people are coming due to, economic problems, et cetera. But you have a lot of people gathering data about the environment because they're marine protected areas often. And you have communities there that are trying to live sustainably often with those marine protected areas. And I'm wondering if these are places that can sort of show us the future. And again, a number of them, for example, the UNESCO Biosphere Program, they are linked up. So they actually talk to each other. They share best practices. They have early career researcher programs. So I guess it would be, rather than reinvent the wheel, it's trying to take advantage of some of the really wonderful examples that you've heard just today, but also I would say in these marine protected areas as well.
Marie writes, and I'm going to read her comment and then for your remarks. I think there is a real need to rethink our institutional structures if we intend to engage with the diversity of communities and build collaborations in knowledge production and action. Research institutions need to invest in this kind of work. It can't be done off the side of our desks. It won't produce academic papers or students, it won't win research grant, it won't pay for itself, but it is important and institutional structures matter. So she's asking, might some of the panelists care to comment on this? What kind of institutional structures are needed to promote the kind of actions for a healthy ocean and healthy people beyond the more traditional academic products that are wonderful, may I add? I think these papers are amazing, but what do we need to do in addition?
Some of my best research has come from first engaging with people out in the field and understanding what the problems are, what their initial impressions are about the system, especially when we've been going out and looking at the pandemic, the reverberating pandemic impacts on planetary health around the world in the far corners and the far-flung corners. It's very hard to get your finger on that from an academic standpoint without engaging with communities. So, I mean, one first step is for researchers to recognize that the depth and quality of their questions is going to really skyrocket if they do that listening first. I could say so many more things, but I'm not going to put, the institutions I work for on the spot. But I just think Marie's comment is very well said.
I would say that one of the key things is this increasing realization that, or exploring what is the impact of research and really looking at that on the ground impact. And I think that's becoming a more and more recognized successful outcome of research, even within some of these more traditional organizations. And we really need to emphasize that when we do have on the ground impact, that we're championing that and we're really promoting those outcomes.
So I'll add a small thing, and that's that, and I think we heard this a little bit already, but so we have a little museum on our campus, and we reach out and teach kids and take them and let them go into the environment and actually do some of the science alongside people. And these are especially in communities where maybe they've never been to the ocean, and we live about, like 3 miles, from the ocean. And so we have that going on, and other things. We also have a high school on our campus. And so we have a lot of courses and reach out to the local schools. And I think we all need to work with as many young people. And we heard that earlier as a message. So I think, got to catch them young.
Yes, and I think a follow-up comment is, how can we engage with funders to enable investment in this kind of activities? How can we shift our academic performance indicators to reward this kind of research and work? And I don't know if there are experiences and ideas in this space. Laura?
So I think that a lot of funders are increasingly at least paying lip service to the idea that you engage with stakeholders. I think the leap there's two leaps that I see from an academic point of view and maybe funder point of view that I haven't seen. One is, if you're going to work with communities, it takes a lot of time and effort and trust. And the typical project grant cycle is not long enough. And it also is in a disconnect with how communities that I've worked with think. So it takes too long and it doesn't last long enough. And then within academia, I would say I have seen an incredible bias towards young early career researchers, particularly women, who are made responsible for interacting with stakeholders and do incredibly invaluable work and have no career path within academia, and their work is not respected or supported. And I know I'm generalizing here, and I don't know if my colleagues have seen this as well, but I think that has to change, that their contributions, their research, and the fact that they have such trust and relationships with communities over a long period of time needs to be valued more in academia as well as by funders.
And in fact, Maria comments, now, thank you so much for these thoughtful responses. We early career researchers look to you for the leadership on this. And Liheya adds, maybe multidisciplinary teams for artists, educators, communicators, and scientists, and having, in a way, sharing and bringing in also a diverse set of skills, perhaps in communication, that could be a path. Are there examples of this approach of bringing in others alongside with academics and practitioners?
Not to be a broken record, but I would say that this chair of oceans and human health that Josep Lloret and all of his colleagues have done is really interesting. You should take a look at it as a model. Now, he grew up in that community. He is supported by the Fishery Association, the local bank, the MPAs, the local physicians, the public health people. It took him 10 years, but now they're actually doing studies to see if people with cancer feel better going in the water, like some of the stuff that Kirst described. It's a very unique situation, but it is tied between academia, the town, the people, a local marine protected area. I'm not saying that one size fits all. We've heard, just like Susanne said, every ecosystem is different, every community is different, but that overall structure, if it could be somehow supported, I find really appealing.
No, that's a great point, Laura. And I want to then shift it because I think several of you highlighted the potential for actions under the decade, for example, really elevating everything ocean as it relates to nutrition, to health, to livelihoods as action track as part of the decade. So what are the opportunities there, and what are some really important milestones that we should look to for bringing ocean and ocean health front and center under the decade and sustainable development goals, of course. Oh, Shakuntala, you're muted, I think, sorry.
I can start for you. I still think I'm sitting both in the three of these high level, or maybe more, the decade on action on nutrition, decade on ocean science, and now the UN Food System Summit. And it's still very, very, very difficult to get linkages and get people working together. It's fragmented into silos, and it's extremely difficult to bring the silos together. And it goes back to the way we are educated. It goes back to the kinds of academic pathways we have had, which are narrow and siloed, and there aren't many people who they pay lip service but aren't prepared to make those linkages, and perhaps they don't know how, they don't have the skills, or they haven't learned how to make those linkages. So it's extremely difficult. But one good thing I can say from where I see former international bodies, international conferences, to where we are today, there is more listening. There is the attitude has changed, and there's more about giving space to others, listening. But one thing is just having a seat at the table and talking. The other thing is to have what you say brought into the debate with that of others, and that's still difficult. But there is movement.
Great. Do you want to add something? I know we're coming closer to the end of our session. Are there other, please.
I mean, so much. And by the way, I too, like Laura, want to thank everybody. I learned so much today and enjoyed your presentations. And again, thank you, Ocean Visions, for giving us the platform. There's pieces of all of this, I think, that are intrinsically happening in the surf therapy sector. First and foremost, as I mentioned, our research is in its infancy. So we have programs out there that have done a year or two study, and this is really incredible. It just happened in the UK, actually, where because they showed through the research, and by the way, a good way to do funding or get funding is to pair with universities, because all students are looking for research work, and you can get some of that from them. But they paired themselves with a university, a local university, and what they found from it were they prioritized first responders, police specifically, and they were finding that police officers were more engaged and missing less work because of surf therapy. And because they were able to prove that and show that, it is the first program in the world that is fully funded by the police department. And I think they hired 4 or 5 staff members. And so these 2 individual police officers who were sitting on their surfboards one day saying, you know, talking to their friends, and so many of them with suicidal tendencies and depression and anxiety, PTSD, they kept talking to each other, thinking, how can we help our colleagues? How can we help our colleagues? They quite literally were sitting on their surfboards talking about that, thinking, why don't we get them surfing? And 3 years later, now they no longer, as active duty police officers, go out in the field. They go into the lineup and surf with people. So this, you know, there are so many crossovers. And again, we're not separate from nature. So the linkage is as much as you are linked to your siblings, your children, your parents. We are so interconnected that I think that there's a lot of things in the pipeline that are coming up, and it's certainly, you know, good and bad, but social media doesn't let you forget it. So check on who you follow, what you read, go to your bookshelf. What are you reading? What are you looking at? What does your Netflix library look like? Are they documentaries, you know, around ocean health and all of these? There's so many ways for us to individually, personally take steps to become educated on our own. So I really appreciate this opportunity to talk a little bit more about what we're doing. So thanks, everybody.
And we really, really appreciate you and your work, Chris. And I know that we're coming to an end. And so I'm going to ask our wonderful panelists to sum up in 1 word, or perhaps 2, what they think is most important to leave our group with. And I'm going to start with Kirsty. 1 word.
Hope.
Excellent. Laura?
Kirsty took my first word, so I say life.
Jolie?
I would say optimism.
Excellent. Shakuntala?
Nourishing.
And Amy?
Conserve.
Conserve. Susanne?
Symbiosis.
Good. And Chris?
I don't want to go after that.
Surf.
That's okay.
Well, I guess I would say surf. No, I mean advocate or stewardship.
How about you, Theo?
You know.
Solutions. Action. So that is my word. And we're going to open a poll for our participants to fill. I want to remind everyone there is a second Healthy Ocean, Healthy People session that will start tomorrow morning Pacific time at 5 a.m. So please attend that. We also, after we show the results of the poll, we will go into a 15-minute break, and then we will resume with the second part of our session, where we will continue the discussion on pathways to action and partnerships. So I'm going to ask the AGU team to open the poll, and we can fill in. So okay, then we'll have a second question. And while the poll is being filled, I want to take this opportunity to, first of all, have my deepest thanks and gratitude for the speakers, for their amazing work, their inspiring presentation, their hopeful messages, and their incredible energy that they brought today to all of us. So thank you. I want to thank the organizers for the summit to bring us all together. And of course, the audience for the participation and contribution. And I don't know if we can show the results. Okay, so strong participation from North America and lots of other regions represented. It's really exciting that despite the challenges of remote meeting and time zones and everything that we're all trying to juggle, we're here together from all of these different regions of the world thinking about solutions for healthy oceans and healthy people. And then we have a second question that, and we want to address now, what sectors are we representing here in this group that it's together? And so if we can show the results on the different sectors, and we can see now again that there's lots of different sectors represented, diverse sectors. And I think that the message that we want to leave everyone with it's really, let's work all together towards promoting healthy ocean for healthy people. So thank you very much. We will take a quick break. We'll be back here promptly at 4:25 Pacific time, and to start the lightning talks and discussions about pathway to action and what partnerships are most needed and how we make that work. Thank you so much.
Centre for Marine Socioecology, and I'm one of the 10 co-chairs that we've got for this session. So this session has been a lot of work, and we're really grateful to lots of co-chairs that their bios will be popped in the chat for you. I'd like to start off with a very quick acknowledgement of country. I'm speaking to you from Nipaluna Lutruwita, which you might know as Hobart, Tasmania. And like many, many places around the world, the lands that I live and work on were never ceded. We'll start off with this next part of the session. So the first part was about all those many different connections between oceans and human health. And this panel that we're about to present to you will focus on the many pathways and partnerships for action. So we'll focus on examples and opportunities for communities and organisations and multi-stakeholder partnerships to operationalise some of these scalable solutions. Just as a reminder to please mute and turn off your video, and then when our panellists finish, you can pop some questions in the chat for them. So we'll start off with some lightning talks, and then we'll go to a Q&A. And the first talk that we have up for you is Dr. Flower Masuya from Tanzania. Thank you.
Everyone, so I'm going to talk to you about the Zanzibar Seaweed Cluster Initiative and actually how we partnered, and we are continuing to partner in action, in doing the activities, the actions that we are doing until now. The cluster is based on a triple helix model. So we are collaborating with academia, government, and business. Of course, the business, we have the farmers and processors and so on. So our initial approach when we are starting the cluster was to start with one-to-one meetings. So we would go to a person that we know and start talking, explaining that we wanted to start the cluster initiative to get their views. And from there, we started to work with people that we know, 2, 3, or a group of people that we know, explaining what we wanted to do so that they would join us. And then we went on and engaged the others who had interest to join us and work together. And then we reached out to other partners like NGOs, like government projects, research projects actually, which is the basis of our cluster initiative. And the moral of the cluster from the beginning was that the cluster is not a project, so the farmers wouldn't expect money from the cluster. And that because we are an innovative cluster initiative, they would compete while cooperating. That is competition. So they are competing, but they are also cooperating. So what was the outcome of all this? We are working to cope with effects of climate change while keeping our people health and the ocean also health. So we have produced more than 50 seaweed products from the low-valued seaweed. So the farmers have high-end products that they sell for higher money, and so they get money, they get food, they get clothes. So they are healthy and they are happy. And we also have. We're also looking at the healthy ocean, that we have innovative farming technologies. We produce technologies that have less impact to the environment. So we keep the ocean as healthy as possible. And we also have strong collaboration between the people. So they have the money, they have the food, clothes, they are competing while cooperating, and they have strong collaboration with also the innovative farming technology. So this way we have healthy people and a healthy ocean. That we started from actually engaging the people one-to-one and continued on from the beginning.
I'm Terence Forrester from University of the West Indies, Jamaica campus, speaking today on mangrove restoration in Jamaica and focusing specifically on some health considerations. This is a map of the area where we're working, and the areas on the coast delineated in orange and red are 40 kilometers of mangroves, 3,500 hectares, half of which are dead. Just north, there's an acacia forest, and I'll come back to why we have also leased it in perpetuity. Mangroves have died typically because the hydrology has been interrupted after extreme weather events. There's also human impact, but the major is extreme weather events. We have piloted and will implement measures to return the hydrology to normal, and then the mangrove should take off. However, there's a sustainability problem where charcoal burners, like my colleague here, use mangrove wood to produce charcoal. And the reason we've leased 2,500 hectares of acacia forest is to ask them instead, in a productive way, to switch to the acacia forest and produce charcoal. All charcoal producers in Jamaica use an earthen kiln, which exposes them to particulates and cyclic hydrocarbons, both of which cause vascular disease and cancers. And so a big part of our interest and application is to interrupt by providing them cleaner technology and health protective appliances. Thank you. Look forward to speaking.
I run a nonprofit called Puget Sound Restoration Fund that restores species and habitats in Puget Sound, Washington. Examples include Olympia oysters, pinto abalone, and bull kelp. We have an incredible team of scientists working in the field, but we also work to connect the marine story to our human story. In Washington State, we have strong ties to natural resources. We're the largest producer of farmed shellfish in the nation, but we also have high-tech urban centers where people aren't directly connected to resources. So the challenge is making the marine system real for people. For example, kelp forests are incredible marine powerhouses. There are strong ecological reasons for conserving and recovering them, but there are rich human connections here as well that we need to bring to light. The fish in this picture are not just in a forest, they are made of the forest. And if fish are made of kelp, we're made of kelp too, through our food. We need to connect these dots between kelp and us. So we are organizing a kelp expedition this year to explore local kelp forests. Humans have gathered food along the kelp highway for a long time. Kelp forests are cultural keystone habitats for tribes and essential for fisheries today. We depend on kelp forests. The expedition gives us a platform for spotlighting kelp's importance and catalyzing conservation. Native oyster restoration provides another perfect nexus between the marine story and the human story. There are lots of ecological reasons to restore native oysters, but the reason restoration efforts are spreading like wildfire is because there are so many human dimensions to this story. Oysters are food, let's not forget. Rebuilding them sends a strong signal to our brains that marine waters can still feed us. It hits deep down human relevance buttons. We need to amplify these connections between the ocean and us so we can build a world full of wonder that we can live in.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adam Miller, and I am the Executive Director and founder of Planet Indonesia. I'm going to talk to you today about our approach to catalyzing community-led marine conservation. So Planet Indonesia is a grassroots organization that utilizes a rights-based approach to marine conservation. The majority of our work is currently focused in West Borneo in Indonesia. The issue our organization addresses is socioeconomic inequalities in rural communities that drives the exploitation of marine resources. What do? We focus on conserving at-risk ecosystems through village-led partnership. We focus at the interface of ocean health, community health, and human rights, deploying a holistic approach to engage locally led solutions. So how do we accomplish that? We focus on addressing and reducing those socioeconomic inequalities to drive conservation. We focus on removing barriers and engaging local communities in marine resource management. So our model is based on four major pillars, or 4 steps. First, we work alongside communities to ensure rights and access over marine resources. Second, we set up management systems, focusing on removing barriers and providing incentives to support local stewardship. The third area is governance. We create community-led organizations and associations that are the decision-making bodies over marine resources. And finally, we connect communities to regenerative value chains to support their conservation efforts. At the heart of what we do is listening to communities. We believe local communities are the experts, and our job is to co-design solutions that improve human well-being and reduce the exploitation of marine resources. We have seen our model go viral. Partnerships a few years ago were just spanning a few households, and today they are over thousands and thousands of individuals. Most recently, we have successfully created the first and largest locally managed marine area on the world's third largest island of Borneo. We've seen dramatic reduction in mangrove loss, improvements in fish stocks, and positive impacts across a number of indicators spanning livelihoods and reproductive rights to mud crab populations and mangrove integrity. So I thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to discussing with you all further.
Hello, sorry. My name is Marie Fudge and I'm an early career oceans professional, and I've been invited to speak live to you, so forgive my nerves and mistakes on reporting back on the early careers oceans professional conversations which took place last night in Australian time. And I'll give you just a thumbnail insight into the session 3 early careers conversations. And I'd like to give Delphine Lobelle from Utrecht University a shout out. Delphine and Audrey and Valeria and many other people put in a lot of effort, and it worked really well and it was a lot of fun. Our session started with a brief overarching look at the links between oceans, human health, but the majority of the energy and activity came from the multimedia breakout sessions. In group 1, Audrey Hassan and Heidi Savella Soderberg from United Nations Environmental Programme led a focus on the global partnerships on marine litter, a digital platform that seeks to bring together plastics initiatives and they examined its potential. And the takeaways from that session were a strong need to bring industry and private investment into action around the digital platform, but also global initiatives and bridging the divide between global and local initiatives. Another takeaway was working out how to actually coordinate and make sense of the wide range of actions, the data sets, the assessment methods to kind of leverage that diversity. And overarching that was this interesting question about how do we actually structure initiatives and institutions to incorporate those different perspectives, the different drivers, the different needs, the different interests in marine and plastic pollutions, and really create that powerful, globally focused, integrated system and bridge that global-local spheres connections. In group 2, Nomvula Mongoza and Henny Unwin from Cawthron Institute in New Zealand talked about how to interweave Indigenous knowledges with Western and other dominant knowledge and institutional systems around decision-making, like government, industry and science. And the takeaways from that session, I think, were an urgent need to shift the ways of thinking from those dominant systems to working with Indigenous knowledges, that there's much to learn from Indigenous knowledges about marine conservation and human health, well-being and those links. But so there's much to learn, but it's also a justice issue, that it requires relationship building and respect and engaging right from the beginning with Indigenous communities to set research agendas and action agendas. Henny also suggested that the language of monetisation could potentially facilitate interpretation between Indigenous knowledge systems, science, industry and government that might be a way to grapple with some of the power imbalances that Indigenous communities face. The call to action, to summarise for you, the call to action, I think, from this ECOP conversation was a real need to invest further into these transdisciplinary knowledge production and actions. It needs investment. And for researchers to mentor and materially enable early career researchers to develop transdisciplinary co-design skills, methods and understanding of the methods, the material support, and enable early career researchers to really grapple with the equity, justice, and power dynamics that are implicit in these new ways of working. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Marie, and thank you to the lightning speakers for some really fascinating insights into some on-the-ground initiatives happening around the world. I think this might be the first meeting that I've ever been to where we've heard about Tanzania and speakers from Tasmania at the same time. There's two places that we often get mixed up sometimes. So we'll start off with some questions for our panelists. So if I can ask our panelists to turn on their videos and turn on their microphones, and we'll get started with some questions. And if you're in the audience, please post any questions you've got for these panelists into the chat there. So I might start off with a question that any of you could jump in and answer. And that would be, what factors do you think have enabled successful solutions that address the human health and ocean health issues simultaneously? Is there anybody that would like to jump in and start with an answer for that? Betsy?
Yes, I'll start, because I want to say that when I first started in this field, I really thought that what I wanted to do was roll up my sleeves and do a particular kind of work that was focused on foundational marine habitats and restoring them. And I thought that that's just simply what needed to be my full focus. And I have learned since then that that is really just the beginning point. And you need to build out from there in so many different ways. You need to not just do good, effective work, but you need to tell the story of your work. You need to build community around your work. And sometimes the path to success is through community engagement and not necessarily through on-the-ground work. So understanding how those two things relate to one another and understanding that there are so many rich and interesting layers to the onion has just been a wonderful experience.
That sort of ties in with some of Marie's comments that we just heard about needing to build those relationships. Would anybody else like to chip in with some comments around what's enabled some of those successful solutions?
Yeah, I'll chime in a bit. I think, you know, what we've learned on the ground in Indonesia, and I think in the previous panel, there was some discussion around trust, but it's just how important relationships and trust are. You know, I talked a little bit earlier in my presentation about how, you know, we're a conservation organization, but we have a large community health program, a PHE program. And besides the fact that that does have positive impacts on human health, what we're also seeing anecdotally and through focus group discussions and evaluations with communities is that a lot of communities find that those health interventions really create trust with a conservation organization, which in Indonesia, conservation often is a dirty word for local communities. It means that they're denied rights, it means that they're excluded, it means that they're not allowed to fish here or extract this resource. And so I think that community health programs for conservation organizations, whether it be through a partnership or through something that you implement directly, are really something that can open the door for broader conversations about conservation as a whole.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Adam. I think trust is something that would be integral to almost all of these solutions. And Flower, I saw that you had your hand up earlier.
Yes, in my case, I would say that actually engaging the people, engaging the community in whatever activities are taking place, be it conservation or sustainable use of resources, when the people feel that it is their resource and they participate in conserving sustainably, I think this is one of the key issues that help in making all these kind of programs successful. For example, in our case, you see, we engage people from the beginning, start with them, if it is research or whatever, and then when they feel they are part of it, then the programs would be successful and conservation would be good.
That's right. I think that key element of co-design and working together is what helped really, builds legitimacy for these actions, as well as the trust and the relationship. So lots of, really interrelated concepts that I think that are, obviously coming out as important. Terence, did you have anything to add there?
Example of community trust and early engagement. So one of the difficulties with our mangrove die-off is a negative vicious cycle of poverty in the area associated with diminishing livelihoods, overfishing, and then overexploitation of the mangroves. About early engagement, we have got a buy-in which says, if we help you to fix the mangrove, or if we all fix the mangroves together, then our fish catches will improve. And this recognition of mutual self-interest in terms of the health of the mangrove and the health of the near shore and the economic consequences of that is a really great lesson that we've learned early on.
Excellent. So have we got some questions that people might have to start to explore some of these issues in a little more detail? So please pop those in the chat if you've got those. So we just had a quick recap around what are some of those enablers for these successful solutions. But what do you think some of the barriers might be, and how could we start to break some of those down? So some of the barriers to taking action in the ocean to improve these connections and the links to human health. Marie, you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, I'm always happy to focus on barriers, Greta.
But you work on solutions too. So
I work on solutions, absolutely. One of the things that strikes me about the presentations that we just heard and the kinds of really inspiring actions and initiatives is the time taken at the beginning to identify what are the shared needs, time taken throughout the process to follow where, for example, in the Indonesian project, health initiatives might become important, well, in all of them actually, where human initiatives or human interests and needs or community interests and needs which aren't directly about the seaweed or the oysters or the seagrass require attention, that community benefit needs to be invested in because it's a rights-based issue and a justice issue, and also because pragmatically that's how we keep collaborating, right? It's give and take. So there's time invested to do that, and my experience from the private sector taught me that as well. Coming into the academic environment, that kind of time is something that can be very difficult to protect, to create and protect in the academic environment. And I'd be interested to know if any of the other panelists have advice and their lessons on how they manage the research environment, expectations about we've got to get the seaweed grown, we've got to get the oyster beds, Yeah. I'd be interested to hear their experience.
Yeah, there's lots of nodding there, Marie, so I think that might be something that's important. Flower, you were nodding there. That seemed like something that might resonate.
Yeah, actually, before I give Marie what she's asking, I was thinking about the importance of indigenous knowledge. Sometimes we go there and start whatever we want to start. We don't take indigenous knowledge. We don't take the advice. So we start something, and if it fails, then we get surprised. But I think indigenous knowledge is quite important to do that. And about academics, I think that any academics, what we need is to really make sure that the research that we use are applied, is the applied research, and the results are being used. In most of the times we have research proposals funded and whatever, but when it comes to the dissemination part, it becomes most of them do not do that. We do research and then we leave it in our shelves and so on. So I would say that when we are making research, we should really define the dissemination part and follow up to make sure that the dissemination is done. And this way it will help a lot.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Flower. Often, you know, we get funding and it's for this particular time, for this particular project, and then, you know, we might do a tiny bit of dissemination at the end, but then that's it. And it creates, I think, all these disconnected short-term relationships when really what we need are long-term, you know, relationships that are built on trust and two-way knowledge exchange and really listening to the people and the communities that we should be working with, not on, as we you know, do our work and our collaborations. Terence, I saw you had your hand up as well.
Sure.
And then we'll go to Betsy.
Sure. As I'm going to touch the academic issue, but give another practical example of barriers, and it starts out with inequality and inequity and how those affect access to livelihoods, well-being, and prosperity. So you have very poor people living in straitened circumstances with very crucial choices to make about how they invest time and scarce resources. Then you have idiots like me coming along and saying, well, we have a 10-year program to develop the mangrove, and we ask you to work with us over 10 years. And until one can recognize the almost impossible choices that you're asking a community to make in this instance, going to fail. So there's got to be some interim program of trying to reduce the risks associated with those choices, whether they be increased alternative livelihoods or what. So managing the different time courses that are required to get a solution for everyone is one of the key barriers, I think.
Yeah, good point. Betsy?
Yes, I think that the bigness of the issue, you know, the ocean health, human health, the bigness of it can sometimes be a barrier. And I think that the way we talk about it can be either engaging or paralyzing or abstract, because even the word ocean can feel distant and not terribly relevant to people who don't live near the ocean. And even if you live on an inland sea, as I do in Puget Sound, to say the ocean conjures something hundreds of miles away for some people, even if they live on the inland marine shoreline. And so words become really important. And so more often we'll use marine waters or local waters or the name of the local bay, a specific place to tether that conversation, to bring it down from the vastness of the ocean, again, that may feel just like too distant from my day-to-day.
Yeah, that's very, very true. We'll get a quick response from Adam, and then we're getting some good questions coming through in the chat, so we might go to some of those as well.
Okay, I'll go fast. So I think one of kind of the ironies of it is I think a barrier to ocean health is human health, and a barrier to human health is ocean health, right? That a lot of times local communities can't engage in good governance of marine resources because of things like poverty, access to healthcare, et cetera. And then, you know, because of that, there's that cycle. So I think that's an interesting kind of phenomenon. I think I agree with everything else. The one other barrier I want to add is funding cycles and funding requirements. I think, you know, everyone on this panel is really working intimately with local communities. On the previous panel, it was also brought up that it's a long process. It's not done in a 2-year grant. It's not done in a 5-year grant. It's probably done over a decade or longer. And most funders don't work on that timeline. And I think the other thing that's a barrier is funding requirement. You know, we work with a lot of other CSOs and we help support them. And these CSOs in Indonesia are some of the most high performing organizations in my mind on the planet, but because of administration reasons, you know, not having audits, et cetera, they can't access the type of funding that a larger organization can. And I think that's a real problem in the funding, you know, climate right now, and who gets money and who makes those decisions.
Yeah, Yeah, all very good points. And I think most funders are kind of after those quick wins, and sometimes the really meaningful contributions that we could make if we work together are things that operate on much longer timescales. So maybe it's a case sometimes where we can of trying to factor in, you know, things that are quick wins that are appealing to our funders, and then trying to sort of plan over longer timescales. We've got some questions coming through on the chat, and Mark Capron there has sort of put forward an imaginative tech solution that could be appropriate in some circumstances. And he said, would anyone like a computer model of their marine ecosystem? A computer model that would be a digital twin with a video game interface. So a community would use it to manage conservation, biodiversity and production in their ecosystem, and educating people at the same time. So I think he means in a sort of future kind of context where people could play with the features in it and then see what the outcomes would be. Maybe so that people could get a sort of hands-on view of how people's decisions impact the ecosystem and vice versa. So are there, you know, would you have any comments about those kinds of solutions, recognizing that there's, you know, very particular times and places where they might be appropriate, but as a suite of tools that could be good to use in some circumstances? Marie?
It sounds very exciting, and I know a bunch of 15-year-old boys here in Hobart who'd really enjoy that. I think as part of a suite of tools that could be really exciting, I'm just recognising that there are a lot of communities across this globe that wouldn't have access to the kind of technology that would support that, and they might have other priorities. Yeah, but it would be an awesome tool. Yeah.
I'll see what other questions we've got coming through on the chat. So Brittany Spriel has asked, thoughts on addressing issues on environmental discrimination, particularly for those living in coastal communities who will be disproportionately affected by climate change. And she's got that from a science communication perspective. So I think Brittany's getting at how do we address those issues of the very real and disproportionate effect that climate change is going to have on communities around the world, and how we communicate that in our work. Anyone want to chip in on that one?
Yeah, maybe a tiny bit. It's a tough question, but I think one thing that is essential is for the conservation sector, particularly the marine conservation sector, to really take a better understanding of the complexity of human systems at the smallest, at a village level. I think there's a tendency for conservationists to map an ecosystem and it's all these crazy relationships and this is connected with this. And then when we talk about humans, it's just, oh, this alternative livelihood lever will fix the problem, right? What we've learned is that different genders, different ethnic groups, all living in the same community, interact with the ocean in vastly different ways. And they interact with your interventions in vastly different ways. And so it's really important to take that into consideration from day one. And we've all talked about co-design. I think it's really important that conservation organizations, have the type of kind of operating procedures within their strategies to make sure that every single different individual in the community is represented in that approach.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Adam, because I'm an ecologist and I wouldn't think of the marine system as, an ecosystem without thinking about all the different little, parts of that and all the nuanced differences. And it's, we obviously need to be thinking about the human system in that same context, thinking about genders and different socioeconomic circumstances and value systems and all that complexity. And there's probably some really exciting ways that we could, or relevant ways that we could start to unpack some of that complexity as well. We've got another question here from Lagia. I'm hoping I'm saying your name vaguely correctly. Apologies if I'm not. What is the most difficult part of your work? So there are obviously, a vast suite of barriers, and we'll flip to talking about solutions again shortly. But what do you think is the most difficult? If you had to pick one thing about your work that you're trying to do, what would be that really big, difficult barrier? There's probably a lot of them, so it's hard to pick one sometimes, isn't it?
I could go first.
Terence, yep.
By nature, these problems are really complex systems that have many different dynamic parts interacting with different frequencies. And yet still we tend to think in fairly simple single intervention, single output. And I think communicating that internally, communicating it with the team, communicating it with the society is a very important but very difficult thing to manage, which is why I thought that having an app, which if properly built with the appropriate variables and dynamics of those variables, could help to address some of these problems.
So incorporating some tech solutions in there might help. Anybody else like to comment on the biggest barrier if you've just had to pick one? Flower?
Yeah, I would say that the barrier would be to make all those actors engaged in a certain activity to work together. Everyone is doing this and everyone is doing that, and when someone comes to a place and finds that there's a work that was done by someone, instead of building up into that has been done, they want to start from the beginning again. And this filters also, and this also will involve also how do we convince the politicians about our research when it is science. So we have all this kind of problems that really make it difficult to do the work.
Yeah, so issues of communication and how to get all those local initiatives that are happening that are really valuable, how to get those recognised at a higher level, and then perhaps about alignment between lots of different activities is happening, if I could try and sort of summarise there. So a lot of these, both the barriers and the solutions, I think, really come down to communication amongst many different parts of our societies and our communities, and the different disciplines and parts of the research system or the solution system trying to work together for these solutions. Some more questions coming up in the chat, and there's a question from Heather Tallis for Terence. So this is for you specifically, Terence. Heather says, he mentioned that the health benefits of shifting from charcoal to cleaner stoves or alternative fuels. Do the community members see the possible health benefits as motivating, or is that not seen as a big enough issue to change behaviour?
So our emphasis really is not confined to the in-house combustion of charcoal. A large part of our emphasis is on the exposure of the people producing charcoal to airborne particulates and chemicals which damage health. And I've been really pleasantly surprised that the engagement we've had so far, people are very, very keen to explore technological solutions to improving their health and protecting it. Just simply discussing, demonstrating, explaining what a new technology is. The immediate question is, well, how much does it cost and can I afford it?
Yeah, good points. Thanks, Terence. If the Ocean Visions crew are listening, can we get Betsy popped back into the spotlight, into the little frame there? Great, thank you very much for that. So we do have some more questions coming through in the chat, but I wanted to touch on something that Marie mentioned in her excellent summary there of a lot of the early career discussions. So the early career ocean professionals that have been getting together and chatting away every morning or night, depending on where they are, what time zone they're in. So Marie, you mentioned about the need for transdisciplinary knowledge production. So different parts of the research system working together with stakeholders and doing that in a really collaborative and co-designed way. And you mentioned needing to help early career researchers develop some of those skills. So did you want to elaborate a little bit on any potential suggestions for maybe institutes or funders or whatever level you'd like to talk about, but what could we be doing or highlighting to try and get some of that skill development in our early career researchers?
Yeah, thank
you. And mid-career researchers too, I should say.
All of us.
Yeah.
No, thank you for the question, Gretta. I think, so I'm a qualitative social researcher, and typically we will be brought in to maybe deal with a little question here or a little question there or a survey there or a survey there. Now that's not sour grapes, because that's really interesting work and important work. But I think when we start to think about transdisciplinary knowledge production, we're moving into a whole different way of thinking about what is knowledge and how do we take into account different views, values and perspectives and different forms of knowledge. And when we do that, one of the things that I guess social research can really bring in and offer is some of the very rigorous and well thought out research design, what we would call methodologies, not just the methods about interviews or survey or whatever, but the whole overarching design. So for example, a participatory action research methodology is very well established, and it has protocols and it has bits and pieces to wrap around the pointy end, maybe the pointy end parts of submarine science projects, for example. One of the things that you do see is often early career researchers coming through the marine sciences, being activated and lit up by conservation opportunities and hearing a lot about engaging with communities and then going out and trying to make that work. But what they might miss out on if they haven't had a social research or humanities training and opportunity is how to grapple with power dynamics, power relations between the science institutions and funding and communities, how to bring in that equity and justice and awareness around the kinds of very, very difficult decisions that Terence talked about that communities will need to make in the face of, otherwise conservation imperatives. And so I guess one of the pathways or opportunities that I see is actually bringing qualitative social researchers into the design phase, because that's very applied research design that actually can co-design the overarching, right? So there's specific skills, knowledges and practices.
Yeah, that's an excellent response there. And looks like Betsy's got something to chip in with as well. Thanks, Betsy.
Yeah, and I would just say that need for an interdisciplinary approach is not just in the academic setting, but also in the collaborative setting writ large. And if you think about ocean health, human health, I mean, it's kind of an all hands on deck proposition, right? And it's not something that scientists alone are going to solve or environmentalists alone are going to solve. And so one needs to involve and collaborate with Indigenous communities and business people, risk takers, innovators, because all of that is needed across the board. And they all bring different perspectives and skills and resources. And one needs to take sort of a big tent, open tent approach to building those partnerships, because that's what's going to sustain effective work moving forward.
Yeah, I really like that phrase, Betsy, the big tent approach. And I think one thing that, I've found kind of frustrating in my career so far and in some of this work is that a lot of our institution and our funders, they refer to or seem to think about communication as a soft skill that it's not an important research skill. And I think that, as we've heard from all of the panelists and the speakers earlier, that communication and how we work with different groups and how we collaborate and how we facilitate some of these conversations and the two-way learnings between so many different groups in many different ways is anything but a soft skill. It's something that's absolutely critical, that I think, all of us could do to really be thinking about and trying to improve. On that, we've had Indigenous knowledge mentioned quite a few times. Has anyone got some examples of where perhaps there's been a really good, appropriate consideration of multiple forms of knowledge that you think is worth highlighting, or perhaps some insights there about great ways to go about that? Adam?
Yeah, just a small example on some of the coastal communities we work with in West Kalimantan. When we first started working there, there was a lot of stories around the kind of catastrophic collapse of mud crab fisheries, which in mangroves was extremely lucrative and a major, source of income, underpinned local livelihoods. And there was a lot of complaints that communities had been told management strategies, things like gear restrictions, size class restrictions, not taking females with eggs, but they were too much of an opportunity cost. They're already strapped with poverty, lack of access to basic services. So how are they also supposed to give up all that part of the catch? And through kind of listening and working with communities, particularly with elders, there was a group that really talked about previously 80s, 60s, 70s, 80s, that a lot of the fishery used to be managed through periodic closures. So they would map out parts of the fishing ground, close them for 3 to 6 months. And then during that time, they basically would have customary law that nothing could be extracted from there, no shrimp, fish, no logging, anything like that. And then all the activities would be focused somewhere else. So, we worked with that and really tried to revitalize that practice. And that's actually what led to the creation of the locally managed marine area. It kind of sparked this viral interest along the coast that actually taking less from the ocean does give us more. And so it just kind of caused this domino effect. And that really all came from listening to elders in the community who 30, 40, well now 60 years ago practiced that management technique. But it just had kind of died out as, with globalization and things like that.
Yeah. Great. Well, it's an excellent example to finish on. So I'm going to hand over to Anupa very shortly, who'll do some wrapping up of this session. But I just wanted to finish up by saying thank you very much to all our panelists. I've learned so much today, so I hope everybody tuning in has as well. I think we've heard from some great examples from Tanzania, Jamaica, US, Indonesia, other parts of the world this morning. So it's been a really fascinating time. And I think we've learned a lot from all of your examples about good ways to go about co-design and building trust and the importance of legitimacy in our work and our collaborations, and some really good insights in how we can co-design excellent projects together to start addressing some of these challenges of links between ocean health and human health. So thank you very much from me, and thank you also to all our other co-chairs. So just a reminder that lots of work today that went into this session from lots of people around the world. So I'll hand over to Anupa. Thank you.
Thank you, Gretta. I appreciate that. So as Gretta said, I'm Anupa Asokan, and on behalf of our wonderful team of co-chairs, thank you for joining us today for our session on healthy ocean and healthy people. We did share a poll about when we started this second half of the session, so I'd like to take a moment to share the results of that poll. Let's see if I can. Can everyone see my screen? There we go. I think if we had a word cloud for this last year, I'd imagine the topic of our entire session here, health, would likely dominate. But as we're looking to the ocean specifically and gathering our collective thoughts on the barriers to supporting the health of our ocean and communities, these are some of the responses that you all shared. Knowledge, disconnection, capitalism, funding, always an issue. And as you're processing some of these words, let's also note that a third of the people participating in this summit today are early career professionals who will help us lead the way in overcoming many of these barriers listed here and take the solutions that we're beginning to see and bring them to scale well beyond the scope of those earlier barriers we identified. So education being here today hopefully helped open some doors and some of those barriers to knowledge for you. Restoration is another key one that I see brought up here. And I think, you know, the last several decades, the narrative around our ocean, if I can lean into the metaphor of health here a little bit and be a little bit cheesy, the narrative around our ocean has centered around disease and decay and what we've inflicted upon our environment. And I think discussions like these focused on the cures or the solutions help us offer hope. Hope to heal our ocean, hope to heal us, and ultimately our planet as a whole. So with this vision of healthy ocean and healthy people and the inextricable link between them, I hope you, like I do, feel energized and ready for action. There's so many opportunities that we only touched on today to expand the impact of these actions. So I hope you'll also fill out our final exit survey that I think is linked in the chat. And so you can stay engaged with us and we can work together to chart the path forward. So thank you again to all of our panelists and speakers and to all of you who tuned in and participated today. And we really look forward to your responses in that final survey and staying in touch with you to work on some of these solutions.